I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And I'm going to start by saying that we live in very, very, very strange times. They're so strange that when we call them out as strange, bad things happen to us. And we're going to be talking about one of those strange things, which is this the teacher at Oakville Trafalgar High School in Ontario, Canada, who has made news around the globe for wearing, I think they're called size Z. I actually did some research into prosthetic breast plates yesterday. Size Z, or just grotesquely huge with erect nipple prosthetic on his chest to teach at the high school where he teaches shop class. And let me just start by saying, I don't mean this person any harm. Clearly, he's got some issues. There's no doubt about that. But what is insidious here is not just that he's doing it. It's that it's being done apparently with the approval of the Oakville Trafalgar High School hierarchy and the Halton School Board. They support this teacher. They support him. So my question is this: who's supporting the kids? Right? I wrote a Substack on this. Go to my Substack, Trish Wood is Critical Substack, and look for Fall of Rome 2.0. And the points I make in that piece, which I wrote in about an hour, which is very fast for me because I was so upset by what I was seeing when I saw the video and the pictures of this chap. We are now asking the students in that school to not believe their own eyes, to lie to themselves about what they're seeing, to interact with a human being who is doing something extremely sexually provocative as if there's nothing going on. I can tell you from personal experience, having grown up in a household where terrible things happened and it was never acknowledged and I was never allowed to talk about it. This is the kind of stuff that drives people into very, very deep, dark places, including depression. And we're inflicting this on these high school students. I think it might be grade 9, if I remember correctly what I read. So I talk about that in this piece, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it in the opening this morning, because I did do a bit of research on it. You see, the trans extremists have this broad description of what trans is. And now we live in a world where trans is whatever anybody wants to call themselves. And then they are protected. They become protected. They are a protected class. This teacher walking into school in his fetish gear is now protected. And apparently, according to Oakville Trafalgar High School and the school board, his rights supersede the rights of the children to not be confronted with somebody's sex fetish. It's insane, right? You know, Prime Minister Trudeau, his father, Pierre Trudeau, actually said something very wise. He said, the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. And he was saying that wisely in order that gay people have the rights that they so desperately in those days needed and eventually got. Bravo. But I will now respond to that and say to his son, who has passed some of the most egregious gender-affirming trans legislation in the world, and that is this: that the bedrooms of the nation have no place in our classrooms. This teacher can do whatever he wants. If he wants to dress that way on the subway, that's fine. Why can't he, if we're going to even allow perhaps a cross-dressing teacher to teach in that state, I'm of two minds about that, but let's just say he can do that. The question is, why does he need the freakishly large breasts? What's he getting out of that? If it's just gender dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, and not a fetish, why can't he just look like an actual woman? Because if you've seen the pictures, women do not look like that. I, as a woman, find this misogynistic. It's offensive that that is his view of what women do or should look like. It is grotesque. And I will tell you something, that every single adult in that school, I include the parents and the Halton School Board, who is supporting this in order to virtue signal how cool they are, or maybe because they're afraid of the law coming down on them in some way, which it seems perhaps it could, they should be ashamed of themselves. History is going to look back on this time and say, what the hell were you people thinking? We threw a generation of kids under the bus to assuage the anxiety of teachers who couldn't read risk-benefit ratios and come up with a policy that worked to save the kids. They were dealing totally in misinformation, totally not factually. They didn't offer anything that was worthwhile for the kids, like they could teach remotely and the kids could come to school. They didn't do any of that. They threw them under the bus, and our government let them. And now we have the same thing with trans extremism in the schools. The children and their mental health is being thrown under the bus to appease an ideology that is so broad and sweeping, virtually anybody can say anything and they become part of this protected class, even to the point where you can bring your sexual fetish of wearing enlarged, grotesquely large female breasts into the classroom in skin-tight tops and parading around also in skin-tight shorts. I mean, this is something that should have been maybe in a comic drag show or something. I mean, it would be funny as adult entertainment, maybe at 2 a.m. for a certain type of person, not me, but it's like, are we living the fall of Rome? Are we living the emperor's new clothes now, where we don't see actually the things before our faces? What are we teaching those kids? What are we teaching them? It is absolutely shameful. And let me tell you something else that's really scary about this. I tried to find an expert who would put this kind of display into some psychiatric context, right? This is not body dysmorphia going on here. It certainly doesn't seem like it. Because body dysmorphia as a problem, as I understand it, doesn't include massive adaptations of what women look like. It's ridiculous. So I tried to get an expert to come on the show to talk about not specifically this person, but what this kind of fetish or behavior might indicate is actually going on. Should they be counted as trans? Should they be given the same protection as trans people? And I couldn't find anybody to do it, because you're not allowed to question this stuff anymore, even professionally, right? Everything is gender affirming. If you question someone's declaration that they're trans, you can be charged, as I understand it, criminally in this country now. That's what's going on here, folks. And so, I don't bear this teacher any malice, particularly. I hope that he or she can find some peace, but they cannot continue to dress this way in front of the students at that school. Right? I don't wish any harm for this person. And I hope that the school and the parents and the school board are going to come to their senses about this and understand what they are now a party to, right? I could not even get an expert to talk to me about. Imagine that people are afraid. People are afraid to talk about what is in front of our very eyes. They will not talk about it. The kids know. They're the ones, as I understand it, who tweeted out some of these pictures, or we wouldn't even have known it was happening. So, I and I'm going to say, if the person who is the teacher, who I'm not naming, by the way, ever hears this show, I would appeal to you that, yes, you do maybe get some sexual gratification out of dressing this way in public in front of the students. But if, maybe you should stop doing it. You want to dress like a woman, go knock yourself out. This isn't dressing like a woman. This is something entirely else. And we've got to face it. We've got to face what's happening here. This can't go on. So that's my rant. Go to my Substack and you can read and see the photographs there, and you can see perhaps how far we have fallen here. So the other thing that we're going to talk about today is I'm going to do a little bit of a mop up on the funeral of the Queen and what it meant to me, and I think to our culture and to the country, because I have a guest who can talk about both things, both the extreme trans movement and the Queen, because he is in the UK, and his name is the Reverend Calvin Robinson, who is one of my very favorite commentators on GB News, which you can watch on YouTube live. So that's great fun. GB News, I wish they would come here and have a Canadian version of GB News, because they are one of the few people broadcasting television type content that isn't constrained by woke dogma. It's wonderful. And they have very smart people on. So Calvin Robinson, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, we don't agree on everything, but listen, he's a very, very smart and thoughtful guy. And if you're feeling like we are living in a kind of a Roman bacchanalian orgy festival, like I am feeling, where morals and the guidance of how to live as a good and decent person in the world the guide rails have fallen away. It's like anything goes now, anything, right? So Calvin has a really good dose of ideas on how to bring us back to some kind of sacred life, whatever that means for you. But I'll tell you something, this is not it. And we are sacrificing our children, and we've got to knock it off. I want to talk to you now just about our funding on the podcast, because something has happened in the last 24 hours. We're recording this on Wednesday, so it'll have been sort of midweek last by the time you hear this on Friday. But PayPal is deplatforming tons of people. Last night, Tucker Carlson, who has really been going hard on the Oakville Trafalgar School story, God bless him, announced that the organization called Gays Against Groomers, who've taken a stand, it includes trans people, by the way, against this sort of nonsense in the schools, have been deplatformed by PayPal. And also, so I heard this morning, has our friend Toby Young, he's been on the show, he runs the Free Speech Union, yay, really important organization in Great Britain, and also the Daily Skeptic, which was a safe haven of non-COVIDian information during COVID. He has also been kicked off, those two organizations have been kicked off PayPal. So this is what I'm going to say to you. I'm going to say to you that we are very, very needy for your financial contribution. If you can make one, we would be grateful, because we got to keep going here. And we're still going very, very hard on the actual science behind the COVID story. We have next week Joseph Freeman, who lead authored the big study that just came out on how the vaccines were causing serious adverse reactions. It's a peer-reviewed study in an august journal. So he's coming next week, but we're going to keep doing that. But we also are going to speak out on things that the mainstream media won't talk about. The mainstream media is supporting what's going on in Oakville Trafalgar School. So I got to take a breath. I'm so upset. But so I do ask for your financial support, and we are using PayPal right now. I don't know how much longer we can use PayPal. So what I would ask you to please do is either use Patreon, which can also be dicey from a free speech point of view, or go to my Substack. Trish Wood is Critical. Type that in. to your search engine, and it will take you to my Substack, and you are able to sign up for a monthly there. And I am writing Substacks now, and I will be using that in the future more to create the community that's been on Patreon. So we're all kind of in the same spot, and we're in a spot where they can't shut us down. That's what they're doing. You know why? Listen, there's an election coming in America. We saw what happened in 2020, right? They hid the Hunter Biden laptop story. They deplatformed the Great Barrington Declaration people. They're at it again. They do the bidding of the narrative stitchers that run Canada and the United States and Great Britain. That's what they do, these big tech companies. And PayPal is a big tech company. Look what they did to GoFundMe did to the truckers, right? I mean, and none of what was said about the funding coming through for the truckers was actually true. They were all innocent citizen donations. So yeah, we're moving everything over to Substack, and they're very, very frightening times. If they can't control the space the information is on, then they try to control the money. We've got to really stand together on this, people. As much as we can, we've got to stand together. I mean it. It's this Oakville Trafalgar thing has really, and not just the event, but the support for it in all of these aspects of the pillars of democracy, forsaking the kids for ideology, right? Is this teacher going to die if he can't wear a giant breast prosthetic to school? I don't think so. So why are they supporting it? Why are parents taking their kids to inappropriate drag shows where the kids are giving money to these inappropriately dressed drag queens as if it's a sexual I mean, we have to stop it. We have to stop it. That is my pitch. You can find me on trishwoodpodcast.com. You can find me on Twitter at Wood Reporting. I have an Instagram as well. And I'm going to be out at the Free Speech in Medicine Conference 2022, and it's open for registration. It's going to be held October 28th to the 30th in Bedeque, Nova Scotia, one of the most beautiful places in the world. You can go to the freespeechinmedicine.com and follow the links to conference registration. And please come and see us. There's going to be some amazing people speaking, including our old friend Jay Bhattacharya, who's coming all the way up to do that. Bruce Party as well, one of the bright lights in this. And it's going to be 2 days of fighting back against this nonsense. We must do it. Please come and see us there if you can. The other thing I want to talk to Calvin Robinson about today is just the funeral for Queen Elizabeth II, and how it made me feel that we're actually losing something historically, not just in losing the Queen, but a way of looking at the world that was quite important. And also the idea of beauty, right? These events that bring us together as a culture are designed to be beautiful and evocative and to bond us to certain ideas. And I feel that those things are being pulled away from us. And so the funeral service for the Queen was one of the most magnificent things I've ever seen. The lone piper and those lovely young men who were carrying the casket, they must have been scared out of their minds. I kept thinking how proud their mothers must be of them, obviously, because especially going up the steps into St. George's Chapel. I think it was St. George's at Windsor. Just unbelievably frightening that I had visions of the casket slipping away. Anyway, so we're going to talk about that too, Calvin and I, about maybe more genteel times than we face now. There's a lot of ugliness in the world, a lot of it. And we have to make time and space for the beauty and the rituals that sustain us, right? And so we're going to talk about that too. So here is my interview with the wonderful Calvin Robinson, who is, let me just give you his official He's called the Reverend Calvin Robinson, and he's a political advisor, TV radio presenter, and conservative commentary. He's minister in charge at Christ Church, Harlesden. So, yeah, it's interesting to have him bring his perspective today on both of these. We go through many subjects actually, but I also am really glad to talk to him because I watch him on GB News a lot and think he's great. So here's my conversation with Calvin Robinson. Hi, Calvin. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Trish?
I'm terrific. You were just a second ago describing the weather in London. Please do it again, and I will swoon because it is my very favorite weather.
It's completely overcast, autumnal, and mild. It's the perfect weather for wearing an overcoat.
Are you getting that little kind of drizzly mist yet in the air that
not
makes
quite,
your skin feel moist?
Quite there. It's just the end of summer, just about reaching autumn. So we've got another couple of weeks until it's misty every day.
And then you can light the fireplace without feeling guilty, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was tempted to turn my heating on this week for the first time.
Well, yeah. So I guess I want to start with the Queen. I mean, I know this is going to run a couple of days from now, and by then it will have been, 4 or 5 days since the funeral, which was Monday. But I'm still kind of in Queen mode because I feel that both the passing of the Queen and the absolutely magnificent funeral and the religious aspect to it were both for me invigorating, but also kind of triggered a sense of nostalgia. In other words, I'm feeling like, although I witnessed something wonderful and historic and a one-off, obviously, in my lifetime, that we may not see the likes of this again. So I have this kind of cauldron of feelings, and I did cry all day through the funeral. I cannot explain why.
Yes.
It may have been the choirs, which get me every time, but I'm just wondering, as a Brit, obviously, and someone who is a devoted Christian, what is your takeaway from what we went through, just for the whole 10 days?
Yeah, I thought it was astonishing how well it was handled. We don't do very many things well in this country. Well, that's a bit of a downer. We don't do everything well in this country. Transportation's rubbish, a bit of rain and the trains stop working. No one's ever on time for anything. But logistically, this entire thing was perfectly organized down to the minute detail. I was so impressed. I think we acted very responsibly and maturely in our mourning process in the 10 days, but the funeral itself was just a homage to the English expression of the Christian faith. It was pure, unadulterated Anglicanism. It was traditional language. It was Christ-focused. It was just everything it was supposed to be. And I'm so pleased to see that Her Majesty the Queen's witness to Christ was expressed to the entire world. The majority of people in the world saw her funeral. There hasn't been a Christian mission that large in, well, perhaps ever actually, since the resurrection. So it's quite a significant event. But
it's interesting you put it that way. Sorry, Calvin, to say, because I think a lot of people don't understand that the Queen is also the head of the Church of England. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So she's the defender of the faith and the supreme governor of the Church of England, and head of the Presbyterian Church in Scotland too. She is the figurehead of Christianity in our country, not in the same way as the Archbishop of Canterbury, and not in the same way as the Pope in Rome, but in that she has, she's one of the most powerful figures in the world. I know she's a constitutional monarchy rather than an absolute monarch, but she embodies the British Constitution. And I think that's important because although she has this incredible amount of influence and power, she acknowledges that she is accountable to God. And I think once you're at that level, there are a lot of world leaders that don't have much, if any, accountability. It's so important to have something bigger than yourself to hold you to account. And for Her Majesty the Queen, that was Jesus Christ. And I think that showed in the way that she lived her life, in the way that she served her people, her subjects. And I think she was a true servant leader. And that is, embodying the message of Christ.
It's so interesting that we are talking about that now because we do live in a world that I feel is being destroyed by kind of secularism. And it's interesting that you talk about the Queen needing to be accountable to somebody, and that is something that we learn. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 22 years, yay!
Yeah.
And but in AA and the other 12-step programs, we are encouraged to believe in something greater than ourselves.
Yes.
For me, I just always go big. I converted to Catholicism, right? But it teaches us that what happens without being accountable to a higher power, regardless of how you see that, chaos ensues and our hearts grow small. And that is, it's really interesting that the idea of a higher power has kept generations now of addicts sober with just that simple thought. In the early days, obviously, of the 12-step programs, it was Christianity, but
Yes.
I think they broadened it out to be more inclusive. But it's interesting that you say that about the Queen, because we do all need to be accountable to someone or something, no matter how powerful we are, don't we?
Well, this is the original sin, isn't it? This is the whole premise of Adam and Eve, saying that they no longer needed God. They could be gods of their own. And that is why we are in the situation that we're in today. Of course, accountability is important. Of course, entering that loving relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ is important. And so many of us forget that in this day and age, where we are hyper-focused on secularism, humanism, individualism. And it is a sense of, well, it's idolatry, really and truly, that the individual is his or her own God, or not even his or her, they or them's own God at this stage, and don't need anyone else or anything else. And I think it's corruptible and it's corrupting, and that is why we're more divided now than ever, because we are forgetting the thing that unites us.
Well, and it is the fraternity and the brotherhood and the community that's fostered by being a participant in those religious services,
yes,
weekly, or sometimes more than that if you're being really good. But yeah, so it was interesting to see that happening. The other thing, just to be maybe a bit more lighthearted, it was watching the 4 young Grenadier Guards, I believe they were called, hoisting that 500-pound casket in the way they did, with such commitment, and I think a bit of fear and devotion. Those guys really did it for me. I have to tell you that I was thinking, oh, their mums must be so proud, of course, because I have 2 grown boys, right? Yeah. But wasn't it wonderful to watch them being so careful, especially going up the steps of St. George's, which looked dicey for a minute?
Yes, I think I saw one of them really sweating as well, which just shows the pressure they were under. And I saw one of their mothers did tweet about how proud she was of her son. And these are people that have served the Queen. And I think it was very fitting and right for them to be the ones that carried her in. It's also interesting that's the moment that got you, because everyone seems to have a moment. Everyone seems to have things that stood out and really got them. And for me, it was the lone piper at the end of the service at St. George's. After we had this magnificent service in the Abbey, and then a smaller, more intimate service at St. George's, and they were all glorious and splendid. And then we went down. It felt like we all went down in the crypt with Her Majesty as she was lowered down. And then we just see this single, lone bagpiper playing away to kind of almost a transition to show that her body had been committed and entrusted to the Lord. And it just, that just struck me as, okay, this is a finale and at the end of an era, and something that we'll, like you said, we'll never see again.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. It was the lone piper for me too. I actually sort of put my hands up to my face. I was crying so hard. Pipes get me anyway. But the theater of that, of the, walking away into kind of nothingness, and it was just like, you guys do it better than anybody. I got to say, like,
nobody does it like us.
No, I know, it's just great. So I just want to also, I will end our discussion of the Queen and the funeral by saying, because Meghan Markle is a problem for me, and she's been a problem for me for a while. Not like when she married Harry, I was up and watched the wedding at 4 a.m. here, and worshipped the dress and loved the choice of veil and cheered for her as a feminist, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But she has exposed herself as none of the things that we thought about her. I kind of feel my I would say my characterization of her as a woman who's pretty good at spotting things in other women is that I think she manipulated Harry's loss of his mother, and I think she portrayed herself as another Diana,
Yes.
and that she used that to really hook him. And now what I don't understand about her is the kind of, yes, you know, they were dancing in the street as they did for Nelson Mandela, and that's a proven lie. Like, she's all of these proven lies, and yet I see on social media young people, mostly young women, totally blindly supporting her.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the reason I bring her up in context of the funeral is because she represents everything that the Queen eschewed. You know, the Queen was about duty and service, and yeah, she had all the castles and all the stuff, but she represented selflessness and duty in a way that shows Meghan and Harry up for being these two kind of grabby grabster grifter types who
Yeah.
demand more and more and more. I thought it was an interesting context to view Meghan.
Yeah, the juxtaposition is interesting. Without sounding detrimental, I see Meghan as an Americanization, really. I don't mean that I do mean it in a bad way, but I don't mean it in a bad way against Americans, just in that it's the celebrity culture that has developed in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, that we have all adapted. And I think she saw the royal family as a step on a ladder in her celebrity culture environment, a way to raise her profile, a way to gain glory and money and fame. And I think that that's a great shame, because that's not what the royal family is about. They are, you know, they get criticized a lot, but they're some of the hardest working people, and they are serving the country in many ways. And I don't think she wanted the service. She didn't want the duty, the obligation, but she wanted all of the reward. And that became obvious. You know, I'm like you. I very much celebrated the marriage. I was there. I was loving the wedding. It was a great celebration, but it very soon became apparent that that's not what she was about. And you're right that she keeps getting found out in these lies, these blatant lies. I pointed out when she lied about the wedding and said that she got married privately before with the Archbishop of Canterbury, because that would have been illegal.
Yeah, I know.
But the reason people are celebrating her, and blindly so, is because it's the victimhood mentality that she endorses. She paints herself as a victim. There's so many people in our culture, in Western culture today, see themselves through that lens, so they can relate to her. And it's convenience, I think, because responsibility, personal responsibility, individual responsibility has gone out of the window. And people blame institutions and systems for everything. It's either institutional racism or systemic violence or whatever. There's always a reason that people haven't got where they want to get in life. Easy to pass the buck onto something or someone else. And I think that that's what Meghan embodies. You know, her whole situation, she's blaming it on racism. That's the reason we don't like her. I happen to be mixed race myself too, and I don't like her. So I don't think it's a case of racism. But you know, when you fall into that victimhood mentality, it traps you, and lots of people are trapped in it. And I pray for their freedom from mental slavery, to use the words of Bob Marley.
Yes, well, I think she's got more going on than just an addiction to the grievance culture. But it's the other thing for me as an old school journalist, investigative journalist too, is you mentioned the Americanization of her approach to being a royal. And I agree, that is not a good thing. And I'll tell you why I feel that way, because that she told a number of things that were absolutely not true. Piers Morgan was right about everything he said.
Oh, yeah.
Demonstrably untrue. The thing about saying she got married secretly, I mean, just nonsense. And I always, when I see people defending Meghan, primarily on Twitter, which is always a mistake to go there, they always talk about how she looks. Yes, she's very pretty and very photogenic, but they also talk about her victimization, but they never address the massive character flaw that is exposed by the fact that most of her grievances are based on lies, which shows to me a level of psychosis going on there that nobody's really talked about all that openly. But you can't liken yourself to Nelson Mandela and not have something really, really wrong with you, so that's the Americanization. In America right now, you can tell big lies if you're popular and it will just like Biden, and it will just be swept under the rug if they like you. Character and facts don't seem to matter as long as you take a good picture. So I so agree with you saying it's an Americanization, and I feel for poor Harry too. Although he's obviously enabling it, but he didn't seem very happy, did he?
No, he didn't. And again, he brings it on himself. I do think he has been a bit of a victim in this situation. I do think he was manipulated by her, but at the same time, he's a man. It's time to man up. Essentially, he's a serviceman. He's served in the army, etc. He needs to find his macho roots and reclaim his masculinity. Yeah, he's been cuckolded by her, and it's a great shame. What he needs to do if he wants to be reunited with his family is ditch the book. Because the book is harmful. You cannot reprint private conversations with your family and expect to be reunited with your family. And I know he's put the book on hold because of the situation with his grandmother, because of the death of her. But he needs to just ditch the project entirely. That would be a massive olive branch.
Well, I think he has to ditch his wife, but I
can't, as a priest, I can't.
Priest, you can't say that.
I can't promote the idea of a divorce, but I do think there needs to be some reconciliation.
And the last thing on Harry and Meghan, but I do want to say this too, that we live in a world where values are kind of signaled in these big extravagant ways, like Harry and Meghan don't do anything of service, it would seem, without there being 10 cameras there to capture it. And yet, her father had a stroke. As far as we know, she's not called. She hasn't been to see him. She's estranged from her family. She's estranged him from his family. She drops friends. They actually are not living a virtuous life full of forgiveness. They seem to be driven by revenge and payback. That seems to be, and all of that. And I did see this on Dan Wooten's show. I think the night of the funeral, I was watching GB, and he had a few guests on talking about Harry and Meghan and how they just seemed angry and complaining the whole time. Though that, to me, if you're going to complain during your grandmother's funeral, if you're going to drop an Oprah interview while Prince Philip is dying, you're not a virtuous person, no matter how many speeches you give to one young world or whatever their current thing is. Like, they're just not behaving that way in their private lives.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about virtue signaling, isn't it? As in, they get on stage and tell other people they need to address their carbon footprint, but then they fly in a private jet to the event to tell people that it's all hypocrisy. They don't want to do good works. They want other people to do good works, and they want to be seen as good people. And it's lazy, it's convenient, and that is what I see from them. I don't see them enacting those values, and that is what I really appreciated about Queen Elizabeth II, is that I feel like she truly embodied those values and committed to doing good works. She didn't always get everything right, but none of us do. We're all fallen individuals. I've taken a lot of criticism over the last 10 days for mourning the loss of the Queen, and because people have said, what about what she said or did on this? And it's like, well, yes, I'm not mourning the loss of her because I think she was a perfect individual. She wasn't a saint. Even the saints aren't perfect. But I think it's very human of us to mourn the loss of someone who's been in our lives and contributed to our lives in such a significant way for such a long time.
No, but you know what? I also think that this picking on the Queen stuff that's coming out mostly of American academia, the anti-racist crew, is that no one led a perfect life. I mean, JFK was a sex addict. We know that. And he ruined the lives of many, many people. His brother, let's not forget Mary Jo Kopechne and what happened at Chappaquiddick. I mean, but that doesn't mean we don't mourn great people, large figures who have done wonderful things, but the left doesn't seem to, they will find the things in people who they didn't agree with, and in people they do agree with, they don't notice those things, right? They don't allow, right? They don't allow great people to have their humanness unless they're on their side, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that's good. You've articulated that well. I think that's why these people on the hard left cannot identify the flaws in people that they admire. And this is why they will not acknowledge the lies that Meghan's told, because they're an unforgiving people. So once they've acknowledged it, they have to write them off. And that's what they do. They write people off. And there is no redemption in the hard left ideology. So perhaps, that's why they're blinded. It's purposeful.
See, this is why it scares me, exactly what you said, that there can be no redemption. You quoted somebody, let me just see if I've got it in my notes. It was really lovely about how the antidote to chaos in our culture is beauty.
Mm.
And I feel, when I read that, I thought, that's so true.
That would have been Roger Scruton.
That's exactly who it was, my friend. Can you just explain to me what he meant and what you meant by retweeting, or not retweeting, but quoting him?
Yeah, because another criticism over the last few days has been, how can we, it's opulent, how can we celebrate all of this gold and crowns and massive, beautiful cathedrals when there are people that are poor and homeless and suffering? And it's like, well, that's what the cathedrals are for. They are for the poor and suffering, because we all deserve beauty. We all deserve the transcendentals, because they direct our gaze away from our suffering towards God. And that is a good thing. But I think there's an element of the left that would rather us not have any access to beauty. No one have access to beauty, because everything has to be equally ugly. That is the argument of Marxism, essentially. Equality. Everyone is equally poor and everything is equally ugly. And that's not really a world that I want to live in.
No,
I think the quote itself is, the great artists of the past were aware that human life is full of chaos and suffering, but they had a remedy for this, and the name of that remedy was beauty.
There you go. I believe that. And I also believe what you're saying, because we are living through a time now where grace and beauty are not only not considered of value anymore, but they're being destroyed by some of these ideologies. For instance, where I live in Toronto, which is now, in my view, a dead city, the lovely historic architecture is being ripped down so they can put up these, it's just beautiful. They were putting up these, they look like the apartment buildings in Pripyat where the Chernobyl reactor was, those gray brutalist, we can't, as my mother used to say, Calvin, we can't have anything nice anymore, right?
Yeah. I was in Toronto a month ago. I snuck in, having not taken the crazy jab.
Yeah.
But I noticed this as well. There's this, you have to really hunt for the beauty. It's there, but you've got to look for it, because there's so many of these modern monstrosities being built right next to them and covering the beautiful historic buildings. It feels like an affront to God, to be honest with you. We've got that in Britain too. The Holyrood Palace is a beautiful palace in Edinburgh, where Her Majesty was based when she was in Scotland sometimes. And directly opposite it is the Scottish Parliament building, which is a very new building. And it's one of the ugliest buildings I have ever seen. And I truly think they built it that way as an affront to Her Majesty. Because the left do not like beauty. And I think that is, without getting too deep, something satanic about their ideology.
You know what? I think there's something to that, because they are blind to this. And I, like in Toronto, for instance, where I live, which is it's a pretty good neighborhood. I always say on the show that I live amongst rich people. I'm rich adjacent, even though I'm not rich myself. So there's beautiful red brick Victorian houses and Edwardian, lovely mansions, and very historic and very much Canadian from early times. And what's happening here now, it's almost like a visual rape, and I'm not overstating it. The woke city planners are allowing people to take over every parking lot, every vacant lot, every house on a lot on the corner, and put up apartment buildings that are 20, 30, even 40 stories high. This is within a 1 mile radius. I would guess there are probably 40 projects like that. I mean, you can't even believe it. So it's not just like we're living in a construction zone. That's one part of how awful it is for the noise and the mess and the trucks and the stuff and the road closures. But it's also that when these things, as they go up, then the landscape where we live in this neighborhood becomes more and more foreign and less beautiful. And I will tell you something, and maybe I just have too much kind of visual sensitivity, but I have anxiety walking through my neighborhood now, seeing this being done and being helpless, impotent to do anything about it.
Yes, exactly. That's the idea, Trish. I don't think they're allowing these people to build these things. I think they're encouraging them. So I've spoken to architects and people studying architecture, and they say, And I've asked the question, why don't we build them like we used to? And they say, well, we're encouraged not to. They talk about the past as if it's a bad thing, and we have to be. They use the word creative these days. We have to be creative. Everything has to be original. Everything has to be new. I'm like, well, why don't we learn from the masters of the past? Why don't we take on board the great things that have been accomplished and build on them? Why does everything have to be brand new and steel and glass? And I do think there is something bad about that. I'm trying not to use too hyperbolic language, but there is something sinister going on when beauty and history are being disregarded for this new creative fad that is ugly, and it is causing anxiety. It's not a pleasant thing to be around or in.
It's really interesting because I was at a 12-step meeting it was pre-COVID when they were still like open to the public as they should be. And a woman came into the meeting crying very hard. And this was in my neighborhood. And she said, another one of the stores that I relied on here has just gone out of business because the property's been bought by a developer. And she said, I can't stand it anymore. Every time I come to this block, there's a new change. And this may connect somehow to WEF thinking in a sense, but there are agendas being played out that have nothing to do with responding to what the people who live here need and want. That's clear. They're not even trying to hide this new kind of high density woke agenda. Yeah. And nor do they care about our mental health. Sorry, go ahead, Calvin.
I just mean, if you wanted to destroy the Western way of life to build something new, whether that's neo-Marxism or whatever your agenda, if you wanted to destroy individuals' livelihoods, if you wanted to close down small to medium-sized enterprises in favor of big business, how would you go about that? You'd probably find a way of policing them, of legislating that they had to be shut for long periods of time so that they can no longer afford to reopen. You probably look for ways of legislating the amount of times people can leave their houses every day, if ever, and the number of times people can go into these small businesses and how often they can shop there, how much they can spend. All of this is probably what you'd be thinking. This just happens to be what we've done over the last couple of years in pretty much all the Western countries. We've shut down the high street and we've stopped people leaving their homes. And of course, SMEs are all collapsing. And the ones that didn't collapse due to lockdowns are, especially over here, we've got a lot of pubs that will never reopen again. And they're now, the few that managed to survive lockdown are being finished off by the energy and fuel crisis, the cost of living crisis, or as I call it, the cost of lockdown crisis. And the governments will blame the war in Ukraine, which is not entirely true because a lot of it is a result of government overspending, government borrowing, and government reactions to COVID, more so than it is the situation in Ukraine. But even the situation in Ukraine is largely manufactured to the point that we're still buying Russian energy, but we're just not doing it directly. We're doing it through China at a upmarked price, and at the same time we're funneling billions of pounds to the Ukraine, whether we're in favor of supporting the war or not, at the expense of people and businesses in our own countries. It's like you could not design it better to crush the middle class and the working classes if you tried.
Well, and crush the spirit of the British people. Right.
Yeah.
Because when I heard that, there was a story in the Daily Mail, which I read probably more than I should, but I read it daily.
Very good.
Is that the energy costs were going to preclude many, many, many of the wonderful British pubs from staying open beyond 6 o'clock at night, mm-hmm. and of course, you better than anybody probably understand being there that the pubs represent, after the church, the center of British life, right? Like to imperil that without a second thought, to me, is absolutely criminal.
Yeah, and thank you for raising that, because often we get focused on the economic argument of people, their livelihoods are being destroyed by these closures. But of course, it's the community, it's our spirit, it's our very soul that's under attack when we can no longer meet as individuals. Again, churches were closed throughout lockdowns, which I think is wicked, because people should be able to pray at all times. And even if people weren't allowed in, priests should have been allowed in to pray for their parishioners at the very least. So churches were closed, the hub, or the old hub of the parish. Now pubs, as you rightly say, the community hub itself is being closed to. People are no longer able to meet and gather in camaraderie, in friendship, in support, but also as a way to fight back. Yeah. We are being crushed in every sense of the word.
Well, it's interesting you would say that in order to fight back, and I want to get to the globalist agenda in a minute because you have that brilliant talk that's really gone pretty rocket ship on Twitter. But I also think that the part of the cognitive dissonance around all of this happening at once is that, like, why isn't Prime Minister Truss, or why didn't Bojo, I guess, before they hand it off, say we are going to have a national effort to keep these pubs open. We're going to, no, you can't close. We're going to help you. And it go like these things are happening. They're collapsing. Things that 5 years ago, Calvin, you and I would have said they would never let the British pub, struggle and close this way. And now they're happening, and we don't hear really word one from the leadership who should be enabling their survival.
I know. You're spot on. 5 years ago, well, even 3 years ago, I would have said there is no way on earth Great Britain or any Western nation will practically impose martial law on their citizens and say you can only leave your house once a day for this amount of time, or you can't invite other people into your home, because an Englishman's home is his castle. But also, we believe in civil liberties. We believe that we live in a free nation, whether that's America, Canada, or Great Britain, or Australia or New Zealand. But all of these countries have fallen over the last couple of years to not even authoritarianism, to totalitarianism. And the worst thing about it is the vast majority of people didn't even notice, because it was such a piecemeal approach. It was step by step. And the worst thing about that is it's still going on. And the governments have said, so the British government have said, look, yeah, we had a nudge unit, and the nudge unit's job was behavioral science. It was to get people scared enough to comply. We had a trusted news initiative that would encourage media outlets to promote government propaganda to keep people in line. We provided bailout packages to media companies, essentially paying them off to be in favor. The government changed the regulatory body of the media, Ofcom, guidance, so that media companies could not question or undermine public health bodies. So not just undermine them, but question them. And all of this is very public and transparent, but it happens step by step by step to a point that, it's the boiling frog effect, that you don't feel the water warming up around you. And it's still happening now. So the video that you mentioned that I released about the WEF, I literally just laid out the facts. I didn't want to put my opinion out there or anything, because I thought we've got to try and open people's eyes to what's going on, because there is a globalist agenda at play, and it is very scary, but people fall for it. And, I fell for it at first with COVID. I was afraid until I started putting research in and finding out what was actually going on. But people who, and the agenda is so rapid that people who maybe didn't fall for the first step are falling for the next step. So with COVID, they took away a lot of our civil liberties and killed a lot of our businesses and our industries. And then there's the climate crisis, so-called climate crisis, where, we've always had weather, we've always had extreme weather, we've always had climate change naturally occurring. And now they're saying that it's all pretty much all man-made, and that we have to make lots of sacrifices in order to prevent the weather from changing at great cost, again, to individuals and small businesses. And then when people aren't buying into the climate crisis, we've got the war in the Ukraine, which is one that I'm going to start piping up about more and more, because it is the next current thing. It is the big current thing that people are, of course, Putin's a bad guy. Of course, we want to be on the side of the good guys. Of course, we want to funnel billions of pounds to Ukraine to help them with the war effort. But it's like 1984. It's like the war has to be continuing. The war, there is no plan to end the war, because there are so many vested interests. And people that didn't buy into COVID, didn't buy into the climate change crisis, are buying into the Ukraine situation without questioning, well, this was regarded as the most corrupt government in Europe until very recently. We have seen politicians from the Ukraine trying to leave the Ukraine with millions of dollars in their suitcases. We have seen that Hunter Biden is on boards of Ukraine companies high up. We have seen that he said that 10% has to go to the big man, implying that his father, the president of the United States, for goodness sake, has to get a backhander for money that's going into Ukraine. We have seen that there are lots of Nazi sympathizing regiments in the Ukrainian forces. And we've seen that Ukraine has been antagonizing Russia and encouraged and goaded by NATO, despite agreements that Ukraine and Russia had in place, and that NATO and Russia had and Ukraine had in place. Now, again, I'm not saying that Russia is good or that Putin is good. I think Russia is a hostile state, and I think Putin is a psychopath. However, I don't think that Ukraine is innocent, and I don't think that this war is everything that it seems from the outskirts. And I think that people have a lot of cognitive dissonance about this issue, as we have with many of the wider issues. But it's from one crisis to the next, and it keeps us in a constant state of anxiety, a constant state of fear, and a constant state of compliance to the government and their globalist puppet masters.
Well said. I completely agree with you about Ukraine and the kind of the current thing. I mean, that meme, when I first saw it several months ago, I laughed my head off. No truer words were said. And if you go to the Twitter or social media accounts of the people who agree on one issue, so they were COVIDian, right? They were maybe COVID zero types. They're also heavily supporting extreme transism without any thinking about what it is or what it means. And then the Ukraine flag goes up. And what those issues all have in common, it's kind of like what I was saying about Harry and Meghan, is that there's an image of something underneath it, may be absolutely desperately requiring of debate and discussion, but you're not allowed to go there, right? So yeah, Putin's bad and the poor Ukraine people are heroic, and Hitler and Churchill and yada, right? That's what they're doing. But if you actually do some inquiry into the history of Ukraine and Russia and what's happening and why it's happening with the Mearsheimer stuff and other people, Stephen Cohen, who's now dead, but who was a brilliant Russia scholar, it's clear that I think Putin was provoked. I don't agree with him doing it, but he was provoked. They knew that if there was a threat that Ukraine would join NATO, he was going to go in. He said so, and they couldn't, they couldn't stop themselves. I believe it was Kamala Harris who even made that clear before this happened. So it's like, why are we blind to the idea that many Ukrainians are going to die? We are going to bankrupt ourselves in order to support a war that could have been ended 6 months ago with serious talks offering Putin the Russian areas that want to go anyway, and some thoughtful rethink on NATO, right? But it's full steam ahead, no matter what the cost. And if you argue that, then you're a bad person and a Putin supporter. It's just a really, really bad place to be in on all of these issues, because you can't debate them, and facts don't seem to matter.
No, we're being dumbed down, aren't we? You're right. You're a Putin apologist. You're a Russian sympathizer. It's the same as you're a transphobe. You're a racist. You're a xenophobe. You're a bigot. You're a COVID-idiot. You're a refuse Nick if you don't take the jab. There's always an easy dismissive argument to shut people down rather than having an open conversation and debate. They don't want us to be critical thinkers. And even saying people are going to saying to me, well, Calvin's, you're clearly a conspiracy theorist. Who is this anonymous they, this ominous they? Yeah. But if you just got to open your eyes. The World Economic Forum is a group of global elites who meet together at Davos to conspire, to lobby each other in their own best interests. If anyone truly trusts that the richest, most powerful people in the world are meeting for our interests without being transparent and accountable to us, then that's just a naive argument.
Yeah, I want very much for membership in the WEF to be put on the election ballots around the world. And I do believe that there are forces now marshalling around that. And I think one of them is in the UK, actually. I think I saw something about a chap who was starting a kind of an anti-WEF party, which I think is a terrific idea. Let's just go into a little bit about the this little sermon, if I can put it that way, you gave on the WEF. It was quite a good backgrounder because I have read the book, so I understand these things, but I think it's really important for people to understand this isn't a conspiracy theory. I think most of my listeners know that by now, but it is, as you say, the WEF is an NGO unaccountable to no one that seems to have captured the leadership of quite a few democracies, including Canada, which, our prime minister loves the motorcades into Davos. He lives for that stuff. So just, if you could just give me the kind of, I don't know if you have Cole's notes over there, but the study notes on the WEF. Yeah, thank you.
So essentially, Klaus Schwab started this project of gathering the richest and most powerful people in the world and just meeting to share ideas. It sounds like quite a noble idea, but then they decided, well, surely we need to be able to implement these ideas. And then they started to infiltrate cabinets all around the world. And Canada is a good example in that Trudeau is a WEF member, and so are the majority of his cabinet. It's the same in Australia, New Zealand, America, and unfortunately Great Britain, in that they've put people in key positions, much like Gramsci and entryism, really. And it's been a case that they've recruited people that they've seen are potentially up and coming, and they've promoted them and encouraged them and supported them, and then essentially indoctrinated them. And all of these people, it's hard not to be conspiratorial when I talk about this, but all these people they're not obeying their puppet masters, but they're all in line with the same ideology. And when we vote for people to represent us, we vote for people that are accountable to us as the electorate. We don't vote for people who are accountable to the lobbyists in Davos at the WEF meeting. We don't want people organizing our lives behind closed doors. We want it to happen in our parliaments, where we can hold them democratically accountable and get rid of them if we don't like what they're doing. So for me, it's very much along the lines of why I voted to leave the European Union, because I think that people who govern us should be based in our country and publicly accountable. I don't like the idea of foreign rule. I don't like the idea of legislation and regulation being written abroad or somewhere else behind closed doors that I can't have a say in. And I think that's the basis of democracy, really. And what I'm finding out, the more and more I read into this idea of the fourth industrial revolution, is democracy is not what they want. They want a neo-feudal environment. It's basically, the simplest way of saying it is capitalist communism, in that the vast majority of us will own nothing and be happy. Using their words, we'll be subservient, essentially, because we'll be dependent on the state with some kind of universal basic income that we get given, essentially, from the government. And there will remain an elite, a 1%, if you like, that do own everything, because everything does have to be owned by someone, and they will have ultimate power, control, and money. And I can't think of anything more frightening. But people are, again, walking blindly into it because there's so much. I don't know, when did we start to trust governments? It was always the conservative argument to never ever trust the government.
I think we started to trust the government when the legacy media decided to go all in on the globalist agenda, right? I mean, you don't hear criticism of it in the legacy media. And I think when they stopped being objective reporters and became narrative supporters, which is what they are, people have been pulled along. I do feel, and maybe this is an overstatement, but I'll say it, because this is a podcast and we can say anything on a podcast, but I feel like the Matthias Desmet mass hypnosis idea that explained some things around COVID to me, and certainly things I was seeing even in people I knew, like the rejection of actual facts and the eyes clouding over when you said, no, there aren't 10,000 kids in hospitals in Toronto. They just they don't want to know about it. It's like I was, attacking them. I feel that is actually a bigger thing. And I feel now that maybe he calls it mass formation psychosis or whatever, but it actually covers not just COVID, but it covers a fealty to the Ukraine policy. It covers fealty to the trans ideas that are being pushed by extremists. It follows fealty to the globalist agenda, climate change. It feels like people are being hypnotized somehow into taking positions that are actually detrimental to themselves.
Yeah, we are. And I think they play to our ego. That's how it works, because first of all, once we're bought into something, we don't want to be proven wrong. So
Yeah.
the jab is a good example. People who've taken multiple doses of this jab want it to work. They're biased for it to work, because if it doesn't work, they've fooled themselves. So of course they have to fight from that perspective. And you can see this on a lower down example of bias. For example, if you own an iPhone, you are more likely to see arguments in favor of an iPhone that you agree with than you if you saw an Android. Yeah. And it's exactly the same on the other way around. People that own Androids think they're the best thing in the world, and if they see any evidence that supports that, that's what they see. They cling to. And we're seeing the same with the jabs, and it's playing to people's egos. All of these situations are. And in fact, what we have to ask ourselves is, am I wrong? And rather than fighting people with ad hominems, saying, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're a COVID idiot, etc., we have to question what they're saying, question the words that people are using, the message that they're putting across, rather than questioning the person themselves. It's very simple, really, and we have to do that to our opponents, and we have to expect our opponents to do that to us too, because unless we're critical thinking, unless we're questioning, we are sheep, and that is how they control us.
There's two ways I could go now. I want to talk to you, obviously, about the trans situation here with this teacher in the Oakville Trafalgar High School, and we'll get there in a minute. But I think we could also go just as easily into something else which connects to what we're talking about. You said in an interview that you feel that maybe this generation of young people is even lost because they've been so indoctrinated by their own addiction to technology. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think the internet was one of the greatest mistakes of the 20th century. I think social media is the devil's playground. It's a cesspit in many ways because of the hostility and abuse and the bullying, etc. And if I used to be a teacher, and if you work in schools, you'll see the vast majority of horrible things that happen in children's lives nowadays are, the internet is a catalyst for them. However, it's also divided society more than anything, because we all reach out to our own tribes, or what we think are our tribes, and we live in our own ghettos, essentially, on the internet, rather than being in real life with real people and having true diversity, the diversity of thought and opinion that we'd find in the pub or in the parish church. We don't experience that anymore, so that's why we're so toxic and polarized. But also, these young people this is the only life they know. So we knew a life before smartphones, before the internet, and we had the broader world, the wide world. They haven't. They've only lived in these silos, and that means that if all that they see on TikTok is that, of course, anyone can define their own reality and decide what gender they are, or make up a new gender and decide their own pronouns or adjectives or whatever they want to do. Of course they can do that. Then if that's all they ever see, of course they're going to believe it. And this is a great problem, because they're being indoctrinated through social media, through the internet, but also through education. Schools are captured. The majority of people who work in education are left-leaning. That's been the case for a long, long time. But the problem is that the left-leaning people at the moment are all on board with critical race theory, queer theory, gender theory, basically all of the neo-Marxist ideologies crammed into these horrible divisive theories that are easily debunked if you actually are evidence informed, but most people aren't these days. So they've been the education system's been captured. So people that go through school and then through university and then end up back in school teaching or something are all pushing the ideology, whether they recognize it or not. So we've got an entire generation of people that have known nothing but this woke nonsense through school, through social media, through the internet, and through their friendship groups. So I don't think it's possible to deprogram them, because they weren't programmed in the first place. This is all they've ever known. So what we have to do is instead essentially forget about this generation, as sad as that sounds, and focus on the next, and reverse the indoctrination, get rid of political ideologies from school, block harmful technologies like TikTok, and make sure that the next generation is exposed to a diversity of thought and opinions, and not just constant propaganda.
I in listening to you, I completely agree with what you're saying. And as a mother of two kids, two grown boys who are pretty active on their phones, which scares me. I feel a sense of shame that I didn't see it sooner. I mean, I with my youngest one, who's 22, I did
Right.
worry about the phone, but I was not married to his father, and his father was going to get him a phone, and I just kind of raised the flag because I thought, well, what, he can't use the phone at my house, but he can. I mean, it just got really complicated. My instinct was that it was bad, but I felt that it was a tsunami coming at me, and I remember I had a discussion about porn with him because I also knew, since none of the porn sites are blocked, and if he's going over to his friend's house to watch a movie, they're going to be looking at porn. That's just what happened. I had that discussion. I said, that's not real, and that women don't like to be treated that way, and that's not how you're supposed to do it. And I thought, like, I'm having a discussion with a 14-year-old about stuff he shouldn't be seeing anyway, but I don't have any agency anymore over what my kids are exposed to. And I don't know how to stop that unless I, pull them out of school and go and live in some like-minded community, which I think are going to actually happen at some point, to block them from these harmful things. What do we do? And also, when you said lost, what did you mean by lost? I mean, what are we going to, as they move into positions of power and they can't critically think, and they can't, they don't share the same moral compass. I mean, what is it going to look like when these lost kids are kind of running the show, and what do we do about it?
I sympathize with you entirely. I really do. It was one of the biggest issues that parents used to speak to me about when I was an assistant principal. What can I do? And but of course, all of his friends have phones, so he needs to have a phone too. And I don't want him to be socially stigmatized. And of course, her friends play on the consoles, so she needs one too, etc., etc. And I think, in all honesty, I know it's easier said than done, but we just have to be tough. We have to be tougher. We have to be authoritarian. Parents have got to parent, essentially. I don't think, if I can offer one piece of advice to parents out there that have children, and by children I mean, under 18 or under 16 at the very least, do not give them a smartphone. Do not let them have a smartphone. It's the single worst thing a parent can do in this day and age, because you're essentially giving them unfettered access to the internet. And I think the internet should be supervised until quite a late age, because, like you said, pornography is one thing, and of course we can talk to them about how it's not real and stuff, but it's still affecting their brain chemistry. Yeah. That the fact that they're looking at it, and we can't undo that with reason. But porn is just one element of it, and it is TikTok, I've mentioned previously, is Chinese subversion, because the Chinese version of TikTok is very wholesome, promoting family values. It has time limits on it. You can't keep scrolling endlessly, etc. The Western version is programmed, it's designed to be addictive, so that these young people are constantly flicking through it. But it's also, the algorithm is designed so that they're constantly seeing things that undermine Western values. So it is subvertive, and it's dangerous to their minds. It's dangerous to our society. So things like that need to be blocked. But if we don't give kids smartphones in the first place, they're not going to be exposed to it at least as much. We can't, of course, we can never control what other parents are doing and what other kids are exposing our kids to, but we can at least control what we allow them access to. Yeah. And I think,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just the smartphone is the most dangerous thing, first and foremost. And then any internet access, including consoles, games consoles, that's where the predators are. That's because pedophiles know that this is where young people are going to be. And parents think it's so, I mean, it is convenient. And again, I'm not trying to be condescending to parents, because I understand how difficult it is to fight against this, but tablets, games consoles, they're not electronic babysitters. Babysitting, looking after your child is difficult. It's supposed to be time consuming. It's supposed to be tough. If something makes it easier, we have to question why. What's the price? What's the trade-off? When we use Google, we think, oh, this is great. We got all this information for free. Of course, it's not free. We are the product, and they're selling our data, and they're manipulating us. And it's the same with giving children access to these electronic devices. They are having advertisements shoved down their throats constantly. Again, subverting our culture. A lot of the content, a lot of the influences are subvertive and dangerous. And we think it's all charming and friendly and light, but it's not. And we just have to avoid giving children any access, unfiltered, unsupervised access to the internet.
And now we have this phenomena. Let's move into the trans issue. we have this phenomena, in my view, and in the view of many people much smarter than I am, that that this explosion of kids in schools now coming to believe they're trans, specifically in schools where they teach that what I call an ideology. I mean, yes, there are body dysmorphic people, and I support that they should get what they need and we should be kind. So let me just say that so nobody comes for me. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff around what's happening on this issue that isn't that. And that we don't seem to have any control over. Certainly in Canada, we don't have control over it now because we've passed a law that if you do not affirm gender, it's a criminal act, right? So it's like kids can diagnose themselves and nobody's allowed to do any kind of investigative exploration to determine if they actually have body dysmorphia or if there's something else, like maybe they're gay and having...
Can we just talk about how insane that is? To allow a child to define their own identity, to define their own reality, and we have to affirm it instantly as adults without being able to question it?
That's the law here. That is the law in Canada. I don't know about the UK. I think it is too, and that's what was driving the Tavistock Clinic, which now has been shut down, as I understand it, but not without a huge fight and not without the capture of many, many virtue signaling politicians. This is scarier to me, I think, than Vladimir Putin. Is the fact that the people who should be thinking clearly are signing on to these things that absolutely make no sense and are harmful to our children and ourselves. And they're just signing off on it with no discussion and no debate. I don't know how we got here, Calvin. I really don't.
I think we got here through liberalism, and I've been quite hard on the left in this podcast, but I'll concede ground that it's actually the left and the right, because it's the liberal right, the classical liberals, as well as the lefty liberals too, because there have been many of us that have thought that you should be free to do whatever you like as long as you're not hurting anybody. And that argument has been the fundamental argument that has undermined our way of life, because it's the erode. It sounds great. It sounds very, well-meaning, but it's the undermining of boundaries. And that when we start to erode boundaries, anything's possible. And that it gets pushed further and further and further. So this idea that a child of 16 should be able to identify however they choose and sign up to puberty blockers just for their mental well-being, etc., then why not a 10-year-old? And then why not a 5-year-old? And now we've got 4-year-olds, and we're hearing as young as 2 years old, they should be able to define their own gender. At 2 years old, a child doesn't know if it's a horse or a sheep. Like, children are exploring, they're using their imagination, and they're children. They don't have much knowledge yet. They cannot identify their gender. They don't necessarily know what gender is at that age. And for anyone to be suggesting that they do, I think is, especially a clinical psychologist, I think is frankly quite criminal. But of course it's got to that natural conclusion, because if there is no boundary, it keeps getting pushed further and further and further. And this is what the trans movement is, just one manifestation of this whole liberal movement. And I think the end game in the liberal movement is paedophilia. I really do, because once you say, well, but love is love, and anyone can love anyone, and so why can't we have a homosexual marriage, and why can't we define our own genders? And then, well, I can identify as I'm a man, but I identify as a woman, and well, if you can do that, why can't you identify as a 12-year-old? And well, I don't see the logical reason why not. If you can choose your own race, you can choose your own gender, why can't you choose your own age? And of course, these are essentially immutable characteristics. We can't define them. I mean, we can define them. We can't choose to redefine them. But the moment we say that we can, because there are no boundaries, that's how you end up with grown men in relationships with young girls, and nobody can argue against it without being called a transphobe or age phobe or whatever the new phobia will be. And we're already seeing the minor attracted persons movement, because they always start with the language, don't they? They're redefining paedophilia to minor attracted persons and claiming they're a victimized minority group. Well, yes, quite right. They should be a minority and they should be victimized. We should be hounding them out of society because it's the greatest evil there is. And we should be protecting our children, not protecting them. But we've got to a movement where everyone that's a minority has to be protected, and everyone has to be free to live their life as however they choose, and because love is love, why not?
Well, exactly. And I in this story about the Oakville Trafalgar School and this teacher with the enormous prosthetic of female breasts. I mean, so this is what I think about it. I think that the idea that trans extremism must be protected at all costs is what got us here. This teacher claims to be trans. Is he just a cross-dresser with a fetish? I mean, clearly the outsized, unnatural female breasts are that he's not dressing like a woman. Women don't look that way, right? This is fetishistic dressing. So what I'm going to say, because I don't know this person, but what I do know is a woman, and I can't let the emperor's new clothes raise its ugly head here. This is not normal, right? Like, this is not Caitlyn Jenner, who kind of tastefully dresses like a woman. This is a person who clearly has a fetish. And I went into I was trying to figure out what the fetish was and I what they called it. And it may be autogynephilia, I think, but I was looking at where you even buy these massive fetishistic plastic breasts, right? And even the companies that sell them put a warning on the video before you can look at it, right? It's not appropriate for young people. Here's a teacher. Not only is he teaching at this school, he's being protected by the school and by the school board because they have this super broad gender fluidity, agenda, right? It's no one's speaking for the kids. And I don't know how we got here. It's just absolutely laughable that this person is not like, if he's actually trans, and say, hey, dude, stop wearing the breast prosthetic, and you can teach.
We can't even get to that point, Trish. We can't get to that point. We concede too much ground. This is the problem. It's step by step by step. We can't say that actually you might be trans. We can't even say that. We can say, look, you are a male. You have male chromosomes running through your body. Every ounce of your DNA has male chromosomes. You have male genitalia. You are an adult human male. You are a man. Now, you might feel uncomfortable with that. You might have to go and pray. You might have to seek some therapy to get to know yourself. But you are your body. You're not in the wrong body. That's not possible. You are your body. Therefore, you are a man. If you feel like you want to dress as a woman, that is highly inappropriate. You cannot be around children. Simple as that, first step. So we wouldn't even get to the stage of, look, you've got these oversized breasts with erect nipples. That is fetishization, and you are forcing young people who cannot consent into your sexual fetish that is inappropriate. We wouldn't even get to that stage if we said, look, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. You cannot change who you are. Even if you mutilate your body with physical surgery, it does not change your DNA, it does not change who you are. That we've got to stop conceding ground to these. It's lunacy. Yeah,
I mean, it is. And the idea that if I'm just saying that in the realm of what is acceptable, right? That opening, that the trans extremists, that this kind of trans at any cost, that children at 2 can say they're trans, at 5 they can see a therapist, at 10 they can start dressing like, it's become kind of open season, right? I do believe there is a small perception of people who do feel that they're in the wrong body, and it gives them some relief. I don't have a problem with that. I don't necessarily want to play.
We should, because these people need help. They need compassionate help. There is a small percentage of people that feel like they are disabled, even though they're fully abled. Now, we would not by any means suggest that we should chop off one of their limbs to make them feel more comfortable in their body. We'd give them therapy and support, and we should do the same with people who think that they're in the wrong body, because they are themselves, they are their body.
And that's not, you cannot do that here, even with kids in Canada, because of the gender affirming care. But I think what bothers me more than anything is not just that it's happening, but it's that we cannot talk about it, and B, that the school and the school boards are throwing the kids under the bus. They did it during COVID. They shut the schools during COVID. They made the kids human shields for their anxious teachers. And now they're doing it again. I mean, it feels like it's open season on kids.
It is. The poor kids. Why are they always the last to be thought about? Why are we always protecting adults over kids? Kids should always come first. We've always known this. Women and children first. And I think, well, perhaps, I was going to say perhaps it's the feminist movement that underwrote a lot of this, but even the feminist movement came from the same neo-Marxism that we're fighting today, this idea that men and women are the same. Men and women are not the same. Well, very similar. Of course we are, because we're the same species. We have lots of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences. Women tend to be more nurturing, more emotive, and more maternal. And men tend to be stronger, more athletic, and traditionally speaking, were the ones that provided for the family, because this is human nature. And up until 5 minutes ago, we knew this and we accepted this and acknowledged this. But the feminist movement said, no, men and women are exactly the same, and that's what equality means. And well, that's not what equality means. It doesn't mean we're exactly the same. It means we have equal opportunities. But even that's gone out of the window. It's been replaced by egalitarianism. And all of it is a nonsense, breaking down boundaries and breaking down our way of life. But we've conceded every single step of the way. And what we have to go back to saying is we need a guideline. Because if it's like you said, like, why are they pushing for extremes? Why are they saying 4-year-olds or 2-year-olds, etc.? Because there are no lines. So we need to get lines from somewhere. And for me, those lines come from the Bible. If we have to have a moral compass, we have to have something that we're rooted in. Otherwise, we can go any direction and it goes crazy and loopy, as it's doing right now, as society is doing right now. If we return to scriptures, if we return to the Bible and said, okay, well, what did God say? Oh, God said he made them male and he made them female. He made them man and he made them woman. He made them in his own image. Therefore, we are reflective of the image of God. So it's an affront to God to be to have surgery to remove breasts or to remove genitalia and to try and change from man to woman or the other way around. That is an affront to God. And if we return to scriptures, well, at least we'd have a guideline and know what the red flags were.
Yeah, I mean, I would take you to task a bit on the feminist thing, because I do call myself a feminist, and an old school feminist, maybe even a TERF. There is a body of women who call themselves feminists who are fighting on the front lines of this on behalf of children.
That is true, but let's break that down, because there's different waves of feminism, and again, that's because each time ground has been conceded. So where would you identify?
Yeah, so I identify as a feminist. Part of it is my age, but I mean, I don't know if modern feminism considers me that, but there was a time when women didn't make equal money. There was a time when men could still rape their wives legally. There was a time when rape victims were not treated well by police. So those kinds of, those to me are the bread and butter issues. And also,
which I think most people would agree with, because I'd say that's more of a human rights issue. That was a fight for equality. But once we've achieved equality, what is the feminist movement fighting for?
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, that's kind of where we stand now, because there was a very interesting piece in Barry Weiss's Substack. She brings forward all these really great voices. And one of them was a woman writing about the idea that women ceded too much sexual territory, during the free love era, which I completely agree. The hookup culture now amongst teenagers, I'm just like, what are you guys doing? I mean, this doesn't honor you. You're not better for it. I've been married more than once. Let's put it that way, Calvin. And I deeply regret that in my earlier years, less enlightened years, was kind of trapped in the idea that anything goes and there's no moral questions around sexuality, really, as long as both parties are interested. And you have to always meet your own emotional needs through these things, right? It wasn't until, it's sort of an interesting story, it wasn't until my life blew up because of my drinking, and I was forced into poverty for a period of time, and forced back into the church, and forced into the community of AA, and forced to live in service of my kid, because this all happened at the same time. I had a baby and I was broke, and it was only then that I understood sort of the error of how I'd been living, which was completely externally focused, with no sort of internal compass about what would make me feel good. So what I did was, I went to AA, I got sober. I lived in service of my little boy and loved it. I shopped at the used. I'd been a very high flying, well off journalist when this happened. So, started shopping in the used clothing stores, that sort of thing. And it absolutely turned my life. It was the happiest I ever was. I was volunteering at the homeless shelter at my church. It was the happiest I've ever been. And I feel that those things of living in service for your children and those things were stolen from us by some of the feminist rhetoric of recent years.
you're absolutely right in all of that. But I think, again, returning to the Bible would have saved you a lot of heartache and pain. And I think that goes for everyone that's been involved romantically with people since the sexual revolution, really, since the 60s. This idea that that sex is a commodity and that we have to chase our own personal happiness. Again, that's another Americanization. Are wrong. They're incorrect, because they leave people lonely, isolated, unhappy, and unfulfilled. And sex is something that's very special, very beautiful, that should be practiced between two people that are married. And there's a reason for that, because it's a way of uniting two people in order to procreate and create a family, which is also something that's amazing and beautiful. And that when sex didn't become about making a family, when sex became about personal pleasure, people became lonelier, abortion rates rose, marriage rates shrunk, families started to erode and break down, and we've ended up in the mess that we're in. So a lot of this does come from the sexual revolution, which is also part, I believe, of the neo-Marxist movement. All of this is, every single problem we've discussed today is rooted in neo-Marxism. And it's, Yuri Bezmenov was talking about this, 40 years ago, that this is what the East wanted to do to the West, and they've won, essentially. And now it's not about, I don't think it's about us fighting the culture wars. It's about fighting back. It's about returning. It's about reversing all of the damage that's already been done.
Look, I'm with you. Okay, I know you've got to go. I just want to drop you with this thought that I know Toby Young apparently was de-PayPal today at both the Free Speech Union and the Daily Skeptic, which is shocking. They're just coming for everybody who questions anything. So what a drag. Anyway, Calvin, thank you so much for doing this. I'm very, very grateful to you. And I enjoy you very much on GB, which I watch on YouTube now. So thank you so much for coming on.
Trish, it's been a great pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation. So I'd happily engage with you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
God bless.
Okay, so that was Reverend Calvin Robinson from GB News, and he is also a man of God doing his thing in the UK. So, I think he has a very wise take on lots of the things I know that you people are thinking deeply about, because I'm thinking deeply about them. I want to end with something that broke on my Twitter yesterday, and it's from Matt Walsh, who's been doing some incredible work on some of the trans extremist issues. And it does, in a sense, reflect what we talked about in last week's show when we had Richie Herron and Helen Joyce on. Richie Herron is a detransitioner, as they're called, someone who went from male to female surgery, bottom surgery, and is suffering and struggling terribly from the surgery. That's always kind of played down in these circumstances. And I was very, very moved. I think Richie's a very brave guy. Anyway, Matt Walsh, who did What is a Woman? It was the first kind of out of the gate documentary that really went after the idea that you cannot challenge this in any way, or there's something wrong with you. Because we did see in the Matt Walsh film, every time he very politely, and I thought in a very restrained fashion, challenged any of the so-called experts. They either wanted to stop the interview or leave the room or make an accusation against him, because you can't defend some of the things they're doing. You can't, scientifically, you cannot defend it. So he did a tweet for Twitter, obviously, and it says, breaking, my team and I have been investigating the transgender clinic at Vanderbilt here in Nashville. Vanderbilt drugs, chemically castrates, and performs double mastectomies on minors, but it gets worse. Here's what we found. Let's start at the beginning. So let's just follow this little tweet thread and get the story from it. Vanderbilt opened its trans clinic in 2018. During a lecture the same year, Dr. Shane Taylor explained how she convinced Nashville to get into the gender transition game. She emphasized that it's a big money maker, especially because the surgeries require a lot of follow-ups. Now, if you heard Richie Herron, you would heard him talk about how much medical follow-up he constantly needs. Now, he can't even pee properly, right? That just is not functioning. Lovely chap. Vanderbilt was apparently concerned that not all of its staff would be on board. Dr. Ellen Clayton warned that conscientious objections are problematic. Anyone who decides not to be involved in transition surgeries due to religious beliefs will face consequences. Imagine that. In case the objectors hadn't gotten the memo, Vanderbilt unveiled a program called Trans Buddies. The buddies are trans activists from the community who attend appointments with trans patients, monitoring the doctors to guard against, in quotes, unsafe behavior such as misgendering. Okay, all right, this is like true. Vanderbilt makes their trans buddies available to children too. They make lots of services available to children, including chemical castration, which are these puberty blockers. Though at some point in the last month, they removed explicit admission of this fact from their site. Here is the archived screenshot. And let me say to you, based on what he's reporting here, Richie reported this too. He said all doubts were managed, meaning that once he got into the system, if he raised a doubt about himself being actually trans, the doubts were managed. It turns out he was just a gay man struggling with a bunch of stuff, and he was streamed into getting the surgery, right? Because you can't not do that now. That's the law, right? But they may have forgotten to delete a video from Vanderbilt Psychiatry's YouTube channel back in 2020, which admits explicitly that they will give and have given irreversible hormone drugs to children as young as 13. And then he shows it in the tweet. After they have drugged and sterilized the kids, Vanderbilt, as explained in this video presentation by plastic surgeon Julian Winokur and physician's assistant Shaylin Vanderbloemen, will happily perform double mastectomies on adolescent girls, like calling it top surgery, right? Like that's such a benign. They're amputating breasts, and they leaves a big scar across the chest of these young women. So let's review. Vanderbilt got into the gender transition game, admittedly, in large part because it's very financially profitable. They then threatened any staff member who objected and enlisted a gang of trans activists to act as surveillance in order to force compliance. What are we doing here? What has happened to medicine? What has happened to medicine? They now castrate, sterilize, and mutilate minors as well as adults while apparently taking steps to hide this activity from public view. This is what healthcare has become in modern America, and may I add, Canada too. It's a pediatric transgender clinic there. Now, what happened today, as I understand it, is Vanderbilt has crashed their own website. They've taken it down. Because of Matt's reporting here. So if you don't think this has gone too far, people, it's gone too far. And I don't mean to harangue you about it, but as a mother and a parent and someone who cares deeply, deeply about medicine and science and what has happened to it, not just because of COVID, but because of this, don't think this isn't touching you, because it's in your schools. If your kid is worried about something gender-ish, maybe they're gay, maybe they're lesbian, they're struggling, and they get taken to a shrink about it, the shrink has to affirm the gender issue. They're not allowed to stop it. Get it? So we got to be vigilant, people. We must be kind also to the people who legitimately struggle, but we need to hold to account the people doing these surgeries. What is their quality control? What is a good outcome? What is a bad outcome? Because there's lots of bad outcomes, non-functioning outcomes. Why do we not allow psychiatrists and psychologists to actually investigate to see that what this means is that young children are diagnosing themselves, right? They don't say, I think I'm schizophrenic, and then they're treated as they're schizophrenic without investigation. This is anti-science. And it's anti-medicine. And it is, in my view, an offshoot of the terrible, unsafe, not unsafe, the terrible, unscientific, and inhumane movement that has taken over medicine. It certainly did during COVID, where many cruel things happened under the guise of public health, and now it's happening here. At least it's been happening for a while, but it's coming to the fore. So please think about this and think about it, what it means to you. Think about the society you want to live in. Think about what Calvin Robinson said. And through all of it, stay critical, and we'll see you.